Hello,
Right.
everyone. We are today with Karim Aïnouz. Sorry if my pronunciation is wrong.
It's great. It's fine.
Thank you. He's the director of Motel Destino, a film that was released this year, 2024, in the Cannes Film Festival. How are you today, Karim?
I am good. I'm good. I'm a little tired because I spent the whole day like doing stuff, but I'm really good. I'm happy with doing this.
A lot of press, I imagine.
No, listen, I'm doing another movie. So I'm actually
Oh, exciting! I love
I
that.
know, I know. I'm preparing another movie, so I'm going into production like in a week. So I was all day rehearsing and stuff. So that's what I was doing. But I have some press ahead of me, but it was mostly this other film.
Working nonstop. I love that.
Yeah.
I would like to know, but okay, let's talk about film then. That's the thing that brought us here today.
Yeah,
Um,
great.
let's talk about Motel Destino. So the film is situated in the northeastern coast of Brazil. I wanted to ask you first
Yeah.
of all, what's your relation to that area? Because typically we see the main icons of Brazil, but I really love that this was more like a coast, like a town. Tell me a bit about that,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah. Listen, of course, I think the film was shot in a city called Beberibe, which is a city which is very close to Fortaleza. And it's interesting you're asking that question because it is a city that's where I come from. I think one of the big things about making this film was actually to be able to shoot, in a place that I love and that I'm very close with. So that's where I was born and raised in a city called Fortaleza, which is very close and it's on the northeastern coast of Brazil. So I really wanted to. I had not done a movie there in about 20 years, maybe like a long time, and I really, or maybe a little less, like 15 years, and I really wanted to do something. So it's shot there. It's a city that it's on the coast, and it's a very particular part of the country because it's not exactly the Amazon, but it's also not Recife, Bahia, and so on. So it was really wonderful to go back home and make this film.
Yes, I was going to ask you how was that returning, like 20 years after? Did you, when you go back to these places, I imagine you notice different things, like with different eyes, different age. How was that experience?
It was really great to make this movie there. First of all, it was a place that was very familiar to me, but it was a place where I mostly spent sort of my holidays when I was a kid.
Okay.
So it was very different, but yet it was the same landscape, it was the same light, it was the same temperature, and the same humor and the same people. So there was something very familiar. But there was something really exciting about this movie in particular because it was a movie that was done after the 4 years of like the extreme right running the country.
Yes,
So it
yes.
was really liberating to be able to go back and to shoot there again. There was a moment that I thought that I would never make a movie in Brazil again. So it was really exciting, like to go back and feel that I was really familiar with this place, but at the same time there was a sense of it was almost like making a movie after the war, like because I think the country has been through so much horrible stuff with the pandemic and with this horrible sort of this horrible sort of leadership. So it was really exciting. There was a sense of this part of the country. It's close to the equator, so the light is very bright. So there was a sense of joy that was really incredible when we're making it. So it was different, but yet very familiar.
That's great. I have two questions about what you just said. You also mentioned the government and politics during the Cannes Film Festival press conference. And I was going to ask you immediately about that. You talked about how governments affect Brazilians' well being, like everyone all around the world, the well being of the people. And I was going to ask you if to you it's important that your films reflect the country's like social political context.
Yeah, I think like when you come from the global south, I think it is. I think making films, it's making films. It's making something that's fun or moving, or it's sort of imagining a new world. But it's also it's impossible to not talk about context. It's impossible to not talk about where we come from. And I think filmmaking is always an act of affirmation and always an act of celebration. And I think for that sense, I don't think my film or my movies are somehow like what we call social films, but at the same time, they have a sense of urgency, you know? I
Yes.
think the difference is that, you know, there's a real sense of urgency because if you come from the global south, in particular Latin America, you never know if you're going to be able to make another film. You never know if your country is going to still be there. You know, like there's a sense of like, it's now. And I think that that's one of the biggest things about making films in Brazil or, you know, in Latin America. And I
Yes,
think
totally.
there's a sense of like, we don't do this, it might be the last time. Every time I make a movie, I think, am I going to be making another one? And so I think Motel Destino has this sense of urgency as well. And I think in particular, even if it doesn't talk about, you know, what happened in the country in the last few years, I think it does, you know, I think it's a movie about the ones that have not been represented, like the character of, yeah, you know, the character of Heraldo and the character of Diana are sort of, you know, the misfits, you know, and I think it's really
Yes,
interesting
totally.
for me to celebrate them as heroes and not as misfits. So I think it is also what we do is also always in conversation with the social political context that we come from.
Yes, even though a film may not address it directly, there's like the sense of urgency, the sense of violence, or running away from something, running away from violence. I was going to talk about the performance of Iago because there's a sort of spectrum where we can see him at times very violent and very like acting in a fast-paced way, but at times you can also see him very sad and vulnerable and like scared at the end of the day. So how did you manage to communicate that to him so he could portray this spectrum? How was the acting, like
Yeah.
the direction there?
Listen, that's a great question because I think it's a difficult part because at the same time, exactly what you said, you know, like he's running away, he's in danger, he's committed a crime or was about to commit a crime. And at the same time, you see him very broken. And I think that was one of the reasons also of making this film and making, you know, a film movie about that character. I think it's the ones that are left aside, you know, like there is something about, there's a book that I really love by a writer from the Martinique called Frantz Fanon, and he had a book called The Wretched. He wrote a book called The Wretched of the Earth. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of what that character is that, you know, I think for me it was really important to have a character that is violent, not because he was born violent. You know, he's violent because there was no other way than negotiating with the world that was not through violence. At the same time, I was really interested in understanding and also making a portrait of a character who is just trying to make a life for himself, you know, and the world put him in a violent place, but he's just trying to get through and survive. I think this is such a huge thing of that character. So I think it was very interesting how it's interesting, right? Because this is how we are. Like if you were put in a position where you're excluded, you are angry, but yet, you know, what you're trying to do is not to be excluded. So for me, what was beautiful about the performance of Iago was that he can deliver something and he can feel something with him, which is very full of anger. But yes, you know, he's a young man becoming a man, you know, like he's a boy becoming a man. And I think there's a sense of pain. I think we talk a lot about a youth which has been disenfranchised or has been wretched, you know, in a way that I sometimes feel it's very unidimensional. For me, the goal, I mean, the beautiful thing about this character is exactly understanding that there's a lot of broken pieces in that character. And for me, working with Iago in particular, it was the first time he made a movie. It was the first time he acted. It was the first time that, you know, he was on a movie set. So I think it was really interesting how somebody, you know, with no experience of making a film or being in a movie set or being directed, you know, as a character that's performing in a film, could have such a range. It's a very difficult thing to do, you know. I think it's either one or the other, but when you put them together, I think that's where it's beautiful. And I think he delivered a performance which is violent yet very poetic.
Yes, totally. I was going to mention that there's a scene. I don't want to really make a lot of spoilers, but there's a scene where there's like this party with just three people, and I think it's genius because you mentioned you know the survival kind of theme and motive, and like everything seems to be under this this like violence and suffering, but at times I feel like that is really representative of being someone from Latin America or South America. We live in like difficult conditions, and still we find the times to party and to laugh and to. I want to thank you for
Yeah.
that. Yeah. How
Oh
did
no, great.
yeah how that did that scene like come to mind? How what was the inspiration for that?
Listen, it was very interesting just because not wanting to do a spoiler, but I think we can do that. Like, the scene before that scene, it's a really violent scene.
Yeah.
It's a scene where something really horrible happens. And I think the inspiration comes from a movie that I saw a long time ago called Bullets of Antonov, which is a movie from Sudan, from a really incredible director from Sudan. And I remember seeing this film, and there was a lot of people sort of running away from war, right? And like going underground, and it was in the middle of the jungle, and it was amazing. Like every time they escaped, there was a party, like there was a celebration. So I think it joins something that I said in the beginning of our conversation. Like, you never know if there will be tomorrow, and I think that there is a sense of vitality and of urgency that I think it was what that scene comes from. It's funny because when we're filming, the scene has a moment that they're dancing, right? And like it wasn't on the script, but when I did it, I thought it was really interesting and important to celebrate. And there's nothing more vital than dance and sex, right? This is the two biggest celebrations of life. And so I thought it would be really interesting to have a scene where after doing something really harsh and violent and horrible, that these characters could somehow still have hope, still can look at life in a way that there is maybe a tomorrow. So I think that's where it came from. And the music is a very popular Brazilian song that I really love, that it's a very kind of popular song in that part of the country. And it talks about somebody who takes a bus to join somebody they love, So I think there was this sense also of like a possibility of love and romance and escape that I think that music had. So I think for me it was something that came about really during the shoot. And I did the scene where they're making a churrasco, like they make a barbecue. And I thought we need to have, a notch up of joy, and that's how it came about.
That's great. I enjoyed watching it. It looks very organic, and I think it represents the complexity of life. You talked a bit about the light in that area of Brazil, of the coast, and I really wanted to dive a little bit into the artistic side. The photo is under Helene Louvard, and the art direction under Marcos Pedroso. So I wanted to ask you about the items that made you decide on this color palette, because it's very specific. It has neons, it has nature, but at the same time it brings you into the motel. How did you build that visually?
Yeah, I really wanted to do a movie that was not a realist film. I mean, I think there's lots of things that happen in the movie that are like at the level of fantasy, right? And I really wanted to capture, so that's one thing, like when we began to make the film, we thought, let's just fuck reality, I think it would be really good to create our own world and invent our own world, but it's not invented out of nowhere. I mean, I think the light in that part of the country is something that I was dying to register, because everything is very bright, and I remember when I was doing the locations, and I had forgotten it. One day I stopped in a bus station, and I think the colors of the clothes of people were so extreme, and I just wanted to convey that feeling. Like, I think also that is the same thing we're talking about before. It's a sense of vitality. It's a sense of being present, being alive. And I think the whole sort of production design of the film was based on that. And I think also the way that Ellen captured the light, even like in the exterior shots, I mean, there's something very, it's very bright, there's something very, but not bright without colors, bright, but with very strong colors. And I think there's a dimension of the film that I really am very proud of, which is a dimension of the unconscious, of the dreams, of fantasy. I think when you go into a motel is really like a place that you can live any kind of fantasy. So I think the element of fantasy was something that was really present when we were making the film. And I think it really informed the colors. It really informed the way we're dealing with light. It really informed the sort of saturation. There is a sense of, over the topness, I think, in the film, that I think it's really represented by those elements. But you know what? I think it also has to do with what I was telling you before. I think it's a film that was made. I think it's a post-war film. I think what happened in Brazil in the last 4 years was a deep tragedy. I mean, the amount of people that were killed, the amount of places that were burned. So there was also a sense of like with the strong colors and with this kind of excess. The film is full of excess. Like in the way people play, in the way people dance, in the way people fuck, in the way people move. And so I really wanted to translate that into the palette and also in the way that we shot the film.
That's really interesting, like the insight. So before we finish, I can't end this interview without talking about destiny, because it's like a huge thing for the film, like the name of the motel, but also the characters. There's this line that talks about destiny and talks about having to tame destiny. So do you believe in destiny? Do you know the this legend of the red how do you call it, this red, like let me search.
You can say it in Spanish.
El hilo rojo.
No, I don't. Tell me.
It's like a Japanese legend about that people that are meant to be have this a red thread between them. Yeah, it's a thread. So this thread can like wrinkle and like can stretch and can like move around, but it can never break. So it's a legend about destiny. Do you believe in that?
No, you know what? I think what's interesting for me, the reason that the name of the film is like that too, is I think for me, it's almost like the character of Heraldo and Diana. They had been forced by destiny or condemned by destiny to have a certain life, And it's very strange that if it wasn't for destiny, they would be still in a position where they would be really oppressed. So I think for me, there's in one hand, destiny is so complex, right? And it's so interesting because it has so many possibilities of interpretation. So I think in one hand, for me, destiny is what, like, if there wasn't something that happened at the end of the film, that would save them, they would be oppressed as they were. They probably would be dead. And so I believe in the sense of destiny, in the sense of fate as well. I think it's an interesting when you speak in English, Yeah. I don't know, in Spanish or in Portuguese is destino, no? But I think there's these two words in English, which is destiny and fate. And I think if it wasn't, they had a fate, but it was destiny that saved them from their fate. And I think I find that very interesting, So in one hand, I find that's really sad, If it feels like somebody like Heraldo, if it wasn't for a twist of fate, he would still be in a place where he was always put on, And I think there is a line, without doing a spoiler at the end of the film, that I think, I won't say the line, but, guys, when we see the film, you understand. But I think for me, I was really interested in the fact that if it wasn't for the twist of fate, their lives would be the same, And I think that's really crazy, I think we shouldn't be dependent on fate. And then I think at the end of the film, there is this line that you mentioned that I think is quite interesting when he says he needs to tame fate. Because I think it's also about taking history into your own hands, and like making sure that this is going to be the life you want to live and not be the life that you have been condemned to live or to be submitted to.
For sure. Heraldo's willpower, because at the end of the day, he has to make it through. Thank you so much. This is so interesting. Yes, I was thinking in Spanish, it's like destino, like a destination, and also fate. Like it works as well. Both concepts apply to the motel because it's also like a place in the middle of the road. It's very interesting.
No, absolutely.
To think about that. So we love to ask creators like you about the creative content they're consuming nowadays. You also you mentioned already like a book and a film, but I wanted to ask you nowadays, who's like a filmmaker that you say that we should be keeping an eye on, like a new one?
Wow, I think there's a filmmaker from France that I really adore called Alice Diop. Okay. I really think we should keep an eye on her. I think she is like a fucking kick-ass, brilliant mind and filmmaker. And I'm a really huge fan of her work. And I think we should really keep an eye on her. I'm really, really a huge fan.
I love that. Thank you so much. We are going to invite everyone who watches this interview to go watch Motel Destino. And I don't know, I just want to keep an eye on your work, your next film. I want to know more
Okay,
about
let's
it.
start. I'm like, it's happening. It's coming out. So I'm
Yeah,
very
yeah,
happy
we're
that
going
I've
to
been
have
very
another
comfortable.
interview.
Yes, next year.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. I'm going to
Okay.
stop recording now, but thank
Thank
you
you.
for
And I want to
talking.
send my love to all the Chilean filmmakers that I admire. So, no, this is really great we did this interview. Thank you.